Every morning you lie to yourself about who you are. I stopped lying before breakfast, and that one change made me more money than any business deal I ever closed. I'm Henry Ford, and what I'm about to tell you isn't about waking up early or drinking water or reading for an hour. This is about something most men are too afraid to face. The 1% do one thing every single morning that separates them from everyone else. And it's not what you think. Most people believe success comes from working harder, from doing more, from pushing through. But that's not it. Success comes from 10 minutes every morning where you face something about yourself that most men spend their entire lives avoiding. And once you see it, once you really see it, everything changes. Not because you suddenly have more discipline, because you finally stop lying to yourself. And when you stop lying, you start building. I'm going to show you exactly what I did every morning that took me from a farm boy with dirt under my fingernails to the man who put America on wheels. But I'm warning you now, this isn't comfortable. This will make you angry at yourself. This will show you things you've been avoiding. And if you're not ready for that, stop listening now. But if you're ready to see the truth, if you're ready to stop pretending and start building, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to teach you, if you actually do it every morning starting tomorrow, will change everything. Not someday, starting tomorrow. This isn't theory. This is how it actually works. And if you listen to this daily, if you come back to it every morning, new layers will unlock each time. So let's begin. Let me tell you something most men never figure out. You're not who you say you are. You're who you act like when nobody's watching. Every single day you wake up and tell yourself a story. You say you're ambitious. You say you're driven. You say you want to build something that matters. But your actions tell a completely different story. And the gap between those two stories, between who you say you are and who you actually are, that gap is destroying your potential. I learned this the hard way. When I was working for Edison, I told everyone I was different. I told my wife I was going to build something of my own someday. I told myself every night that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I'd start working on my own designs. Tomorrow I'd take action. Tomorrow I'd be brave. But tomorrow never came. Because every morning I'd wake up and do the exact same things. I'd get ready for work. I'd go to Edison's company. I'd do my job. I'd come home. I'd eat dinner. I'd go to bed. And I'd tell myself the same lie again. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Nothing about that routine was ambitious. Nothing about that routine was building anything. I was living exactly like every other man. Comfortable, safe, going through the motions. One morning I sat down at my desk before anyone else arrived. The sun wasn't up yet. The building was quiet. And I asked myself a question that changed everything. What did I actually do yesterday? Not what I intended to do. Not what I wished I'd done. Not what I told myself I'd do. What did I actually do? I took out a piece of paper, and I wrote down the truth. I spent the first hour reading the newspaper, reading about other men building things, other men taking risks, other men succeeding. Then I went to work and did what I was told for 8 hours. Then I came home and spent the evening at the club talking about what I was going to do someday. That was the truth. And when I saw it written down on that paper, when I couldn't hide from it anymore, I felt sick. Because I'd been calling myself ambitious while living like a coward. I'd been saying I wanted to build something while spending every day working on someone else's dream. The words and the actions didn't match. And they hadn't matched for years. That morning I started something I call the mirror test. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to do it. Because this one practice, done every single morning for just 5 minutes, will close the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. Here's how it works. Every morning, before you do anything else, you take out a piece of paper. You write down one thing you did yesterday that betrayed what you claim to value. Just one thing. You don't make excuses for it. You don't justify it. You don't tell yourself it wasn't that bad. You just write it down and look at it. That first morning, this is what I wrote. You say you want to build your own company, but you spent your best hour yesterday reading about other people's success instead of working on your own. I kept that piece of paper on my desk all day. Every time I looked at it, I felt it. the shame, the truth, the gap between who I said I was and who I actually was. And here's what most people don't understand. That gap, that's where most men live their entire lives. They say they want wealth, but they choose comfort every single day. They say they want respect, but they avoid every difficult conversation. They say they want to build something that matters, but they waste their best hours on things that don't matter at all. The lie compounds. Every single day the lie gets bigger. And by the time they're old men, they've lived an entire life based on a story they told themselves instead of the truth about who they actually were. I see you doing it right now. You say you're serious about success. But what did you do yesterday? Did you work on your business or did you read the news for an hour? Did you have the hard conversation or did you avoid it again? Did you do the thing that scares you or did you do the thing that feels safe? Your answers to those questions, that's who you really are, not who you say you are, who you actually are. And until you're willing to look at that gap every morning, until you're willing to write it down and face it, nothing changes. You'll keep telling yourself the same comfortable lies, and you'll keep getting the same disappointing results. But here's what happens when you start doing the mirror test every morning. You can't lie to yourself anymore. When you write down the truth about yesterday, when you see it on paper in your own handwriting, something shifts in your brain. You start making different choices during the day. Not because you suddenly have more discipline, because lying to yourself becomes more painful than doing the hard thing. Let me give you a real example from my own life. There was a period when I kept telling myself that family mattered most to me. I'd say it to my wife. I'd say it to myself. I believed it. But every evening on my way home from work, I'd stop at the club. Just for an hour, I'd tell myself. Just to relax after a long day. Just to talk with other men about business and ideas. But that hour would turn into 2 hours, sometimes 3. And by the time I got home, my children were already in bed. I was choosing the club over my family, every single night. But I kept telling myself family mattered most. One morning I did the mirror test. I wrote this down. You say family matters most, but you went to the club before you went home to your children last night. I stared at that sentence for a long time, and I couldn't hide from it. I couldn't tell myself it was just one time, because it wasn't one time. It was every time. That piece of paper sat on my desk all day, and that evening, I started driving toward the club. It was pure habit. My hands turned the wheel without thinking. But then I remembered that piece of paper. I saw those words in my mind. You say family matters most, but you went to the club before you went home to your children. And I couldn't do it again. I couldn't prove that sentence true one more time. So I turned the car around. I drove straight home. I got there while my children were still awake. And that night, for the first time in months, I ate dinner with my family. I played with my children. I talked with my wife. Not because I suddenly felt like it, because I'd seen the truth that morning, and I refused to keep proving it true. That's the power of the mirror test. It doesn't give you discipline. It gives you clarity. And clarity, when it's painful enough, forces action. Because once you see the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are, you only have 2 choices. You can keep widening that gap, or you can start closing it. There's no middle ground. Every single action you take either closes the gap or widens it. Every single choice either proves you're becoming who you say you are or proves you're still lying. Now let me tell you what happens when you do this every single morning for 30 days. Your life starts changing in ways you can't explain to other people. Okay, the changes aren't dramatic at first. They're small, quiet, but they compound. The first week is hard. You don't want to write down the truth. You don't want to see it. You don't want to admit how big the gap really is. Your hand will resist. Your mind will make excuses. You'll want to skip it. But you don't skip it. You write it down anyway. By the second week, something shifts. You start making different choices during the day. Not because you're trying harder, because you know you'll have to write about it tomorrow morning. You know you'll have to see it on paper. You know you'll have to face it. So you make the harder choice. You have the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. You do the work instead of reading about other people doing work. You go home instead of stopping at the club. By the third week, you start to feel different. The gap is closing. Not completely, but it's smaller than it was. And you can feel it in your chest. You're becoming more honest, more consistent, more aligned. You don't just say you're ambitious anymore, you act like it. By the 4th week, other people start noticing. They don't know what changed, but they feel it. You're different. You speak with more certainty. You move with more purpose. You don't apologize for things that don't need apologies. Something about you has shifted, and it all comes from 5 minutes every morning. 5 minutes of brutal honesty. 5 minutes of looking at the gap. 5 minutes of refusing to lie to yourself one more day. Now here's what I need you to understand. This practice isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Most men fail not because they're weak. They fail because they don't know who they actually are. They're operating on a false image of themselves. They think they're disciplined, but they're not. They think they're brave, but they're not. They think they're building something, but they're not. The mirror test shows you the truth. And once you see the truth clearly, you can actually do something about it. But you have to do it every single morning. One day doesn't change anything. 1 week of honesty doesn't undo years of lying to yourself. This is a daily practice. Every morning you take out a piece of paper. You write down one thing you did yesterday that betrayed your stated values. You look at it, you feel it, and then you make a choice. Are you going to keep proving that truth today? Or are you going to close that gap? Now let me show you something even more powerful. Because the mirror test is just the beginning. Once you start seeing the gap clearly, once you stop lying to yourself about who you are, you'll start seeing something else. You'll start seeing all the permissions you've been giving yourself to stay stuck. And that's where real transformation begins. But before I show you that, you need to understand something. The reason most men never close the gap is because they keep giving themselves permission to avoid closing it. They give themselves permission to wait, permission to delay, permission to stay comfortable. And those permissions sound so reasonable that they don't even realize they're doing it. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Here's something most men never see about themselves. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're giving yourself permission to fail every single day, and you don't even know you're doing it. Let me explain what I mean. Every time you say, "I'll do it when," you're giving yourself permission to delay. Every time you say, "I need to," you're giving yourself permission to wait. Every time you say, "I deserve to," you're giving yourself permission to choose comfort over progress. These phrases sound reasonable, they sound responsible, but they're not. They're permission slips. They're ways of letting yourself off the hook. They're comfortable lies that keep you exactly where you are. I did this for years before I saw it. I'd tell myself I'd start my automobile company when I had more experience. That sounded smart, didn't it? That sounded like wisdom, but it was a permission slip. I was giving myself permission to wait, permission to stay comfortable in my job with Edison, permission to avoid the risk of trying something on my own. Another one. I'd tell myself I needed to think more about my engine designs before I started building them. That sounded reasonable. That sounded like careful planning. But it was a permission slip. I was giving myself permission to avoid action. Permission to stay in my head instead of getting my hands dirty. Permission to never find out if my ideas would actually work. And here's one more. I'd tell myself I deserved to relax at the club after a long day of work. That sounded fair, didn't it? That sounded like balance, but it was a permission slip. I was giving myself permission to waste my best hours, permission to avoid the work that actually mattered, permission to coast instead of build. Every single one of those permission slips sounded good at the time. Every one of them felt justified, but they were all traps. They were all ways of avoiding discomfort while pretending I was being smart. And I could have kept giving myself those permissions for the next 20 years. I could have kept waiting for more experience, kept thinking about designs instead of building them, kept relaxing at the club instead of working on what mattered. And I would have died having never built anything of my own, never tried, never risked, never found out what I was capable of. But one morning something changed. I was sitting at my desk doing the mirror test, writing down how I'd betrayed my values the day before. And I realized something that hit me like a hammer to the chest. The problem wasn't just my actions. The problem was the permissions I kept giving myself. I was explicitly allowing myself to delay, to wait, to choose comfort. And as long as I kept giving myself those permissions, nothing would ever change. So I did something I'd never done before. I revoked them. I took out a fresh piece of paper, and I wrote this. I no longer have permission to wait for more experience. There is no perfect time. There's only now. I kept that paper in my pocket for an entire month. Every time I started to tell myself I'd start my company when I had more experience, I felt that paper. And I remembered. I'd already revoked that permission. I didn't get to use that excuse anymore. And something shifted. Without that permission, without that escape route, I had to act. I couldn't keep delaying. I couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment. So I started. Not when I felt ready, not when circumstances were perfect, right then, because I'd removed my own excuse. Now let me show you how this works in your life. Think about the excuses you use most often, the phrases that come out of your mouth when you're avoiding something you know you should do. Maybe it's, I'll start when I have more money. Maybe it's, I need to learn more first. Maybe it's, I deserve a break after working so hard. Whatever your phrase is, that's your permission slip. That's the excuse you keep giving yourself to stay comfortable. That's the lie you tell yourself that sounds like wisdom. And here's what you need to understand. You could keep giving yourself that permission for the rest of your life. Nothing will force you to stop. No one will take it away from you. You have to revoke it yourself. So here's what I started doing every morning after the mirror test. I'd identify one permission I gave myself yesterday, one excuse I used, one comfortable lie I told myself. Then I'd write it down, cross it out, hard, like I was killing it. And I'd say out loud, I no longer have permission to do that. Let me give you real examples from my own life so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. I no longer have permission to read the newspaper before reviewing my business numbers. That was one of the first permissions I revoked. Every morning I'd been starting my day reading about what other people were doing. Other people's businesses, other people's problems, other people's success. And by the time I got to my own work, my mind was already scattered. My energy was already spent on things that didn't matter. So I revoked that permission. Business numbers first, every single morning, no exceptions. No matter what was happening in the news, no matter what I was curious about. Business first, always. Here's another one. I no longer have permission to say, I'm too busy, when what I really mean is, I don't want to do it. I'd been hiding behind that excuse for years. Someone would ask me to do something I didn't want to do, and I'd say, I'm too busy. It sounded legitimate. It sounded reasonable. But it was a lie. I wasn't too busy. I just didn't want to do it. So I revoked that permission. If I didn't want to do something, I said no, clearly, directly, honestly. No more hiding behind being busy. No more making excuses. Just the truth. And here's one more. I no longer have permission to avoid difficult conversations by telling myself the timing isn't right. That had been my favorite excuse. There was a conversation I needed to have with one of my engineers about his work, about his attitude, about changes that needed to happen. But every time I thought about having it, I'd tell myself the timing wasn't right. He's working on an important project. It can wait until next week, until things calm down, until the moment is better. But the moment is never perfect. The timing is never ideal. Things never calm down on their own. So I revoked that permission. I had the conversation that day. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. Did he get defensive? Yes. Did it need to happen? Absolutely. And by revoking my permission to wait for perfect timing, I forced myself to do it. Now here's what happens when you start revoking permissions every morning. Your life starts moving forward faster than you ever thought possible. Because here's the truth that most people never figure out. Most of your problems aren't actually problems. They're permissions you've given yourself to avoid solving them. You're not stuck because circumstances are against you. You're stuck because you keep giving yourself permission to stay stuck. You say you can't start your business because you don't have enough money. But that's a permission slip. You're giving yourself permission to wait, and you could wait forever using that excuse. You say you can't have that difficult conversation because the other person isn't ready, but that's a permission slip. You're giving yourself permission to avoid discomfort, and you could avoid it forever using that excuse. You say you can't work on your goals today because you're too tired, but that's a permission slip. You're giving yourself permission to coast, and you could coast forever using that excuse. Every excuse you use, every reason you give for not acting, that's a permission slip. And as long as you keep giving yourself those permissions, you'll stay exactly where you are. But when you start revoking them, when you start removing your own escape routes, everything changes. Because now you have to act. You've closed off the exits. You've ended the excuses. You've revoked your own permissions to stay comfortable. And without those permissions, the only option left is to move forward. Let me tell you about a man who learned this lesson. His name was Robert. He worked in my factory for 8 years. Smart man, capable, good with his hands, but he'd been in the same position the entire time. One day he came to me. He was frustrated. He wanted to know why he wasn't advancing, why other men who'd started after him were getting promoted while he stayed in the same place. I asked him one question. What permissions are you giving yourself? He didn't understand at first, so I explained. You've given yourself permission to do exactly what's required and nothing more. You've given yourself permission to leave at quitting time every day, even when there's important work that needs finishing. You've given yourself permission to stay quiet in meetings because speaking up feels risky. Every one of those is a permission slip, and every one of those permissions is keeping you exactly where you are. Robert tried to argue with me. Those weren't permissions, he said. Those were just being reasonable. Just being fair, just protecting himself. That's when I told him something he never forgot. Reasonable men stay in the same position their whole lives. Unreasonable men build empires. If you want to advance, if you want to rise, you have to revoke your permission to be reasonable. You have to start doing unreasonable things, working when you're tired, speaking up when it's uncomfortable, staying late when everyone else goes home. Not because someone's forcing you to, because you've revoked your permission to do the minimum. Robert sat there for a long time without saying anything. I could see him thinking, see him processing, see the truth hitting him. And then he left. The next morning he started doing what I'm teaching you. Every morning he identified one permission he'd given himself the day before, and he revoked it. I no longer have permission to do just the minimum required. I no longer have permission to leave when there's still work that matters. I no longer have permission to stay quiet when I have something valuable to say. Within 4 months, Robert was promoted. Not because he suddenly became more skilled, not because I felt sorry for him, because he stopped giving himself permission to play small. He revoked his own excuses. He closed off his own escape routes. And when you do that, when you remove your own permissions to stay comfortable, you have no choice but to grow. That's the power of this practice. It doesn't make you more talented. It doesn't give you more opportunities. It makes you more honest about what you're actually doing. And once you're honest about it, you can stop doing it. Now here's your second morning practice. After you do the mirror test, after you write down how you betrayed your values yesterday, you're going to write down one permission you gave yourself, one excuse you used, one phrase that let you off the hook. Then you're going to cross it out, hard, and you're going to say out loud with conviction, I no longer have permission to do that. You're going to feel that permission ending. You're going to feel that escape route closing. You're going to feel yourself becoming someone who doesn't need those excuses anymore. And then, during the day, when you're tempted to use that excuse again, you're going to remember. You already revoked that permission. You don't get to use it anymore. You're going to have to make a different choice, a harder choice, a braver choice. And that's how you change. Not through one big dramatic moment, through small daily revocations of the permissions that keep you stuck. Do this every morning alongside the mirror test. 5 minutes for the mirror test, 2 minutes to revoke one permission, 7 minutes total. That's all it takes. But those 7 minutes, done every single morning without fail, will transform your entire life. Because you'll stop lying to yourself about who you are, and you'll stop giving yourself permission to stay that way. Now let me show you something even more powerful, something that most men are too afraid to think about. But if you can handle it, if you can actually do what I'm about to teach you, it will change how you see every single morning for the rest of your life. Your older self is watching you right now, and he's judging every choice you make. I talk to that man every single morning, before I do the mirror test, before I revoke permissions, before I do anything else. I close my eyes, and I see myself as an old man, maybe 80 years old, maybe 90, maybe on my deathbed, lying there, weak, tired, looking back at my entire life, and I ask him one question. If I die tonight, would I regret how I spent yesterday? If the answer is yes, I identify exactly what would have made yesterday worth dying after. And then I do that thing today, first, before anything else. Not later, not when I feel like it, first. Because that old man is real. He's not some fantasy version of me. He's me in 40 years. And every choice I make today is creating the life he'll have to live. Every morning I waste is a morning he'll regret. Every risk I avoid is an opportunity he'll wish I'd taken. Every comfortable choice I make is a brave choice he needed me to make. Most men never think about this. They live in the present. They think about what feels good today, what's comfortable today, what's easy today, and they assume they'll have time later. They assume they'll change eventually. They assume tomorrow will be different without actually making tomorrow different. But tomorrow never comes. Because tomorrow you'll make the same choice you made today, unless you start thinking from the end instead of from the beginning. Let me tell you how I learned this. When I was still working for Edison, I had an idea for an engine design. It was completely different from anything being done at the time. New approach to combustion, new way of arranging the cylinders, new methods that could change how engines worked entirely. But I was afraid to build it. What if it didn't work? What if people laughed at me? What if I wasted time and money on something that went nowhere? What if I tried and failed and everyone saw me fail? So I did what most men do. I avoided it. I told myself I'd work on it later, when I had more time, more money, more confidence, more certainty that it would work. One morning I was sitting at my desk. The sun wasn't up yet. The building was empty. And instead of doing the mirror test, I did something different. I closed my eyes, and I imagined myself as an old man at the end of my life, sitting in a chair, body weak, energy gone, just sitting there looking back at everything. And I asked that old man a question. What do you remember about these years working for Edison? The answer came immediately, and it wasn't what I expected. Nothing. I don't remember a single day of it. It all blurs together into one long stretch of showing up and doing what I was told. One long stretch of comfortable safety that meant nothing. Then I asked another question. What do you wish I had done instead? And the answer hit me so hard I had to open my eyes. I wish you'd been brave enough to build that engine. I wish you'd tried. I wish you'd found out if your idea could work instead of spending your whole life wondering. Instead, you spent decades playing it safe, working on other men's dreams, never taking the risk to pursue your own. And now you're sitting here at the end with nothing but regret. I opened my eyes. My hands were shaking, because I knew that old man was right. If I kept avoiding that engine design, if I kept telling myself I'd do it later, I would become exactly that man. An old man full of regret because he was too afraid to try. That day I went home after work, and I started building that engine. Not because I felt ready, not because the fear went away, not because I suddenly had more confidence, because I refused to become an old man who was too afraid to try. And that engine, that design I was too scared to work on, that became the foundation for everything I built later. But here's what would have happened if I hadn't done the deathbed question that morning. I would have kept avoiding it. I would have kept telling myself I'd work on it someday. And someday never comes. I would have spent my whole life working for Edison. Good job, steady pay, comfortable, safe. And I would have died wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to try. Now let me show you how to do this yourself. Tomorrow morning, before you do anything else, close your eyes. See yourself as an old person at the end of your life. Don't rush this. Actually see them. See the wrinkles. See the tired eyes. See the gray hair. See someone who lived your entire life and is now looking back at all of it. Ask them this question. If you could send me one message right now, what would you say? And then listen. The answer will come. It might not be what you want to hear. It probably won't be comfortable. But it will be true. And once you hear it, you have a choice. You can ignore it and go back to your comfortable routine. Or you can do what that old person is begging you to do. Here's what that old man tells me most mornings. Don't waste this day. You don't get it back. Do the thing that actually matters. Have the hard conversation you're avoiding. Take the risk that scares you. Stop pretending you have unlimited time. That's what he says, every single morning. And every morning I have to choose. Do I listen to him? Or do I listen to the part of me that wants to stay comfortable? Most mornings I listen to him. Some mornings I don't. And on the mornings I don't, I always regret it. Always. Because he's right. Every single time. Now here's what most men never figure out. You don't actually have unlimited time. You think you do. You think you'll get to it later. You think you have decades ahead of you to make different choices. But you don't know that. None of us know how much time we have. And even if you do have decades, they go faster than you think. One day you wake up and you are the old man, and all you have are the choices you made or didn't make, the risks you took or didn't take, the things you built or didn't build. That's why the deathbed question is so powerful. It forces you to see the end before you get there. It forces you to confront what will actually matter and what won't. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Most people live their entire lives avoiding this question. They don't want to think about getting old. They don't want to think about dying. They don't want to think about regret. So they never check in with their future self. They just assume tomorrow will be different from today, without actually making it different. They assume they'll change eventually, without choosing to change today. And then one day they wake up, and they are the old man. And all they have is regret for the life they could have lived if they'd been brave enough to live it. I'm not going to let that happen to you, not if you actually listen to what I'm teaching. Every morning you're going to do the deathbed question. You're going to close your eyes and see that old version of yourself. You're going to hear what they have to say, and you're going to do that thing first. Before checking your mail, before reading the news, before doing anything else, because that's the thing that will still matter when everything else is forgotten. Now let me tell you what happens when you do this every morning for a month. Your priorities change completely. The things that felt urgent stop feeling urgent. The things you were avoiding suddenly feel necessary. The comfortable choices stop feeling comfortable. Because you can't lie to yourself anymore about what matters. You know what matters. You know what doesn't. And you know that every day you delay is a day your future self will regret. That clarity, that certainty about what actually matters, that's worth more than any business strategy I could teach you. That's worth more than any amount of money. Because without it, you'll build the wrong things. You'll chase the wrong goals. You'll waste your life on things that don't matter. But with it, with that clarity that comes from talking to your future self every morning, you become unstoppable. Not because you're more talented, because you know exactly what you're building and why. And that knowledge makes you move differently, speak differently, choose differently. Here's your third morning practice. Before the mirror test, before revoking permissions, you close your eyes. You see yourself as an old person at the end of your life, and you ask, what should I do today that you'll remember? What should I do that will still matter when I'm where you are? Listen for the answer. Then do that thing first. Now let me show you something that very few men ever figure out. But the ones who do, they build things that last long after they're gone. I don't plan my day forward from the morning. I plan it backward from my deathbed. Let me explain what that means. Most people wake up and ask themselves, what should I do today? That's the wrong question. That question gives you a list of tasks, obligations, things other people need from you, things that feel urgent but don't actually matter. It keeps you busy but not purposeful. The question I ask every morning is different. I ask, if I were 80 years old lying on my deathbed, looking back at this specific day, what would I wish I had done? Then I work backward from that answer to this morning. And that's what I do first. Not later. Not after I handle the urgent things. First. Because that's the only thing that will matter when I'm actually 80 years old. Everything else is just noise. Let me tell you how I learned this. When I was working for Edison, I had a good job, steady income, respected position. People looked up to me. Every morning I'd wake up and think about what the day required, what Edison needed, what was expected of me, what would keep me in good standing, what would make me look good. And I'd plan my day around those things, tasks, meetings, reports, obligations, all the things that felt important. One morning I did something different. I imagined myself as an old man at the very end of my life, looking back at all those years. And I asked that old man, "What do you remember about working for Edison?" The answer shocked me. Nothing. Not a single specific day, not a single meeting or report or task. It all blurred together into one long, comfortable stretch of doing what was expected. Then I asked, "What do you wish I'd done instead?" And the answer was immediate and clear. Build something of your own. Stop working on other men's dreams and start working on yours. Stop waiting for permission and start taking action. That morning I stopped asking, "What does my day require?" and started asking, "What does my future require?" Those are two completely different questions. The first question makes you busy. The second question makes you purposeful. The first question fills your day with tasks that don't matter. The second question fills your life with work that does. That day I started working on my own engine designs at night, after my job at Edison, after dinner, when I was tired, when I wanted to relax, because my future required it, not because my day required it. And that shift, that simple shift in how I planned my time, that's what eventually led to everything I built. The automobile, the assembly line, the company. All of it came from asking what my future required instead of what my day required. But here's what would have happened if I'd kept planning my days forward instead of backward. I would have spent my entire life being busy, doing important things, respected things, comfortable things, but never building anything of my own, never creating anything that lasted, never becoming the man I was capable of becoming. I would have been comfortable and safe and completely unfulfilled. When you plan your day forward, you see obligations. When you plan it backward from your deathbed, you see what actually matters. Forward planning makes you efficient. Backward planning makes you purposeful. And at the end of your life, nobody cares how efficient you were. They care what you built, who you helped, what you stood for, whether you wasted your time or used it. So here's what I want you to do starting tomorrow morning. After you talk to your future self, after you do the deathbed question, ask these 5 questions. First question, what would my 80-year-old self regret not doing today? That's your priority. That's what you do first. Everything else can wait. Second question, what's the one thing I could do today that would still matter in 20 years? Not 20 days, 20 years. Most of what you do will be forgotten in 20 days. What will still matter in 20 years? Do that. Third question, what am I avoiding today that I'll wish I'd faced? That's the uncomfortable conversation. That's the risk you're not taking. That's the work you're putting off. Face it today. Fourth question, who do I need to talk to or help or make things right with before it's too late? That's the relationship that needs attention. That's the apology you owe. That's the person you've been neglecting. Handle it now. Fifth question, what am I building today that will outlast me? If the answer is nothing, then what are you doing? Why are you spending your time on things that won't matter? These 5 questions, asked every morning while working backward from your deathbed, will show you what actually matters. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. You'll realize that most of what fills your day doesn't matter at all. The meetings that feel important, the emails that feel urgent, the problems that feel pressing. From the perspective of your deathbed, most of your daily concerns are just noise. They won't be remembered. They won't matter. They're just ways to stay busy while avoiding the things that actually count. Here's what actually matters when you look at your life from the end. Did you build something that mattered? Did you help people who needed help? Did you face the things that scared you? Did you become the person you were capable of becoming? Did you waste your time on earth or did you use it? Those are the only questions that matter at the end. Everything else is just distraction. Now let me tell you about a man who learned this lesson too late. His name was Thomas. He worked for one of my competitors. Smart man, hardworking, dedicated. Spent 20 years building someone else's company, making someone else rich, doing good work, important work, respected work. Then one day he came to see me. He'd just turned 50, and something had shifted in him. He said, "I woke up this morning and realized I've been planning my days around what other people need, and I've never once asked what my future needs." I asked him, "What does your future need?" He couldn't answer at first, because he'd never thought about it. He'd spent 50 years reacting to the demands of each day, never once thinking about whether those demands were building the life he actually wanted. We sat there for a long time, and I walked him through the questions I'm teaching you. What will you remember? What will you regret? What actually matters? By the end of that conversation, he had tears in his eyes, not because he was sad, because he finally saw clearly what he'd been missing. He'd been so busy being successful that he'd never stopped to ask if he was building something that mattered to him. 6 months later, he quit his job, started his own company, smaller than what he'd been working on. Less money at first, less prestige, but it was his. And when I saw him after that, he looked different, younger somehow, more alive, more present. I asked him what changed. He said, "I stopped planning my days forward and started planning them backward. And now every single thing I do matters, because I know my 80-year-old self will remember it." That's the power of this practice. It doesn't just change what you do, it changes why you do it. Now let me bring all of this together and show you exactly what to do tomorrow morning. Because everything I've taught you is worthless if you don't actually do it. And I'm going to make it so simple that you have no excuse not to start. Tomorrow morning, before you do anything else, you're going to do 4 things. Just 4. Takes about 15 minutes total. But those 15 minutes will change everything if you actually do them every single day. First thing, the deathbed question. Close your eyes. See yourself as an old person at the end of your life. Ask them, "What should I do today that you'll remember?" Listen. Then do that thing first. Takes 3 minutes. Second thing, the mirror test. Take out a piece of paper. Write down one thing you did yesterday that betrayed what you claim to value. Look at it. Feel it. Keep that paper where you can see it all day. Takes 5 minutes. Third thing, revoke one permission. On that same piece of paper, write down one permission you gave yourself yesterday that kept you stuck. Cross it out hard. Say out loud, "I no longer have permission to do that." Takes 2 minutes. Fourth thing, plan backward. Ask the 5 questions. What would I regret not doing? What will matter in 20 years? What am I avoiding? Who needs my attention? What am I building that will last? Answer them. Then do the first answer first. Takes 5 minutes. That's it. 15 minutes total. 4 practices. But those 15 minutes, done every single morning without fail, will close the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. Will remove the permissions keeping you stuck. Will force you to focus on what actually matters. Will transform you into someone unrecognizable, not in a year, in 30 days. Now let me tell you what's going to happen. The first few days will feel strange. Writing down your failures every morning isn't comfortable. Revoking your excuses feels exposing. Talking to your future self seems odd. Planning backward feels unnatural. But keep going, because around day 4 or 5, something shifts. You start making different choices during the day. Not because you suddenly have more discipline, because lying to yourself becomes more painful than doing the hard thing. Because you know you'll have to write about it tomorrow. Because you remember you revoked that permission. Because you know your future self is watching. Around day 10, people start noticing. They won't know what changed, but they'll feel it. You're moving differently, speaking differently, choosing differently. You're not asking for permission anymore. You're not making excuses. You're not waiting for the right time. You're just acting. By day 20, the practices become natural. You don't have to force yourself to do them. You want to do them because you've seen the results. You've felt the gap closing. You've watched yourself become someone different. By day 30, if you haven't skipped a single day, you'll be unrecognizable. Not to other people necessarily, to yourself. You'll look back at the person you were 30 days ago and barely recognize them. That version of you was lying to themselves every day, giving themselves permission to stay comfortable, never thinking about whether they were building something that mattered. And you'll realize you can never go back to being that person. Because once you see the truth clearly, once you close the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are, there's no going back. You're either growing or you're dying. And for the first time in your life, you're choosing to grow. Now I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds too simple. There must be more to it than this. 15 minutes every morning can't possibly change everything. Let me tell you something. The most powerful things are always simple. The reason most men fail isn't because success is complicated. It's because they won't do the simple things consistently. They want some secret strategy, some hidden technique, some magic formula that makes it easy. But there is no magic. There's just honest daily action. There's just looking at yourself clearly and doing something about what you see. There's just asking the right questions and acting on the answers. That's it. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Just 15 minutes of brutal honesty every single morning. Let me give you one more story before we close. When I was building my first automobile, people told me it was impossible, too expensive, too complicated, too risky, too many things that could go wrong. And some mornings I believed them. Some mornings I'd wake up and think, what if they're right? What if I'm wasting my time? What if this never works? Those were the mornings I almost quit. But every single morning, I did the 4 practices I just taught you. I talked to my 80-year-old self. He said, keep building, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're afraid, even when everyone says it won't work, keep building. I did the mirror test. I wrote down when I'd chosen comfort over progress the day before, when I'd listened to doubt instead of vision, when I'd delayed instead of acted. I revoked permissions. I no longer have permission to doubt myself. I no longer have permission to wait for everyone else to believe before I start. I no longer have permission to quit when it gets hard. And I planned backward. What would my 80-year-old self regret? Not trying, not finishing, not finding out if this could work. So I kept building, even on the mornings when I didn't feel like it, even on the days when nothing worked, even when failure after failure piled up. And you know what happened? Most mornings, nothing dramatic happened. I built. I failed. I tried again. I made small progress. Nothing worth celebrating, nothing impressive. Just consistent daily action towards something that mattered. But those undramatic mornings, those consistent daily choices, they compound. And eventually they turned into something nobody expected. Not because I was more talented than everyone else, because I was more honest with myself than everyone else, because I stopped giving myself permission to quit, because I worked backward from the end instead of forward from the beginning, because I let my future self guide my present actions, and because of that, I built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that changed the world. You can do the same thing, not because you're special, because you're willing to look at yourself honestly every morning, because you're willing to revoke your permissions, because you're willing to work backward from your deathbed, because you're willing to do 15 minutes of uncomfortable work every single morning. That's all it takes. Honesty, consistency, and the courage to face what most men spend their lives avoiding. Now let me tell you something that will separate you from most people. Most people will listen to everything I just said and do nothing. They'll nod along. They'll think, that makes sense. They'll tell themselves they'll start tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and they don't start. They give themselves permission to wait one more day, then another. then another. And 6 months from now, they'll be exactly where they are today, still lying to themselves about who they are, still giving themselves permission to stay comfortable, still planning their days forward instead of backward, still avoiding the work that actually matters. But you're going to be different. You're going to do the 4 practices tomorrow morning. You're going to do them the next morning, and the morning after that. And 30 days from now, you're going to be completely different. Not because you learned something new, because you actually did something with what you learned. That's the only difference between people who transform and people who stay stuck. The people who transform take action. So here's my question for you. Which person are you going to be? Are you going to listen to this and do nothing? Or are you going to wake up tomorrow and do the 15 minutes? You get to choose right now. But you don't get to choose by saying you'll do it. You choose by actually doing it tomorrow morning. One more thing. Listen to this again tomorrow and the day after, because you'll catch things you missed the first time. You'll hear things differently. The principles will sink deeper with each listen. This isn't meant to be heard once. This is meant to be studied, repeated, applied daily, until it becomes part of who you are. So come back to this. Let it reprogram how you think about your mornings. Let it close the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. Let it transform you into the kind of person who builds things that last. And when you look back years from now, when you're that old person sitting in the chair reflecting on your life, you'll remember tomorrow morning as the day everything changed. The day you stopped lying to yourself. The day you revoked your permissions. The day you started living backward from your deathbed instead of forward from your fear. That's when your real life begins. So start tomorrow. Do the 15 minutes. Every single day. No exceptions. Build the life your future self will thank you for.